Hi, and welcome to the 8th and final episode of Our Connected Future. I'm your host, Max Peacock, and in this episode I'm joined by three guests from the Bachelor of Media Production and Design faculty, Vicky McArthur, Katie Graham, and Stéfy McKnight. Vicki McArthur is the director of the BMPD program at Carleton University. She's an associate professor at the university with research interests including human-computer interaction, social inclusion, user experience design, augmented reality, and much more. Katie is a part of the faculty of the BMPD program and a partner at Carleton's Immersive Media Studio. She's currently completing her Ph.D. in architecture with a focus on the relationship between architecture and virtual reality for storytelling. Stéfy McKnight is an assistant professor in the BMPD program and a co-collaborator on the research creation project titled Cam Hunters. Their research interests look at surveillance as contemporary colonialism in so-called Canada, queer and femme culture representation in digital and virtual spaces, 2S LGBTQIA+ activism, technology in rural communities, and art as function creep. In this episode, the BMPD faculty and I discuss the mission and evolution of the program, as well as the importance of digital storytelling skills in this day and age. I'd like to extend my thanks to these three faculty members for having taken the time to chat with me. Speaking on behalf of the student body, I can say it's rare to see so much of our faculty on the same screen at the same time, so it was a very exciting opportunity to have been a part of this conversation. This is your host, Max Peacock, and you're listening to episode 8 of Our Connected Future, featuring Vicky McArthur, Katie Graham, and Stéfy McKnight. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, enjoy. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining me for this episode today, guys. I'm really looking forward to chatting with all of you. Although at this point in the episode, I will have each given you guys your own individual introduction. I was hoping each of you guys could introduce yourselves and tell students about, introduce yourself within the context of the BMPD program, but then also how the opportunity to actually join the program came up and how you kind of arrived at that point in your career. Professor McArthur, could I start with you first? Is that okay?
Sure. I'm Vicki McArthur. I'm the program director for BMPD, and I was the first faculty hire to support the program when it launched. Condense about 20 years of my life. I guess I started out in industry as a web developer by trade. I was a junior, then senior web developer. I did freelance stuff. I worked for Brock University as one of their web developers for about 2 years. And was teaching on the side in Niagara College's program in web design. And then I attended my first HCI conference and realized that as much as I liked building digital technologies, I liked the idea of researching them as well. So I changed my trajectory, went to grad school at York University and ended up doing a lot of stuff with like game studies, augmented reality. And then that sort of got me looking at digital media technologies from a practical standpoint, a usability standpoint, but also sort of best practices for teaching, supporting novice designers as they start gaining these skills and these technologies. So that's sort of what I bring with me to the BMPD program.
Awesome. Stéfy, how about you?
Okay, so I'm Stéfy. My pronouns are they, she, and I came to the BMPD program a little bit differently. I was doing my PhD at Queen's University. I'm primarily an artist scholar, so my research focuses on research creation, specifically in a context of political, social, and cultural events and theories, mainly in surveillance studies. When I started, I've never been, this is my first time, I would say, outside of a student role. I did my Bachelor in Fine Arts at Nipissing University, went straight into my Master's in Cultural Studies, and then straight into my PhD. And this position came up on a random email I got, and I thought that it was perfect for the intersections and the interdisciplinarity of my work at the time. I was also in this really weird time where the pandemic was just kind of hitting. And I, as a student, wasn't sure. We were all kind of in this area of like, we don't know that there's ever going to be academic jobs. But my supervisors were very, very supportive. And they said, you know, if you find that one job that's perfect, apply. Who knows what's going to happen? And that's essentially what came of it. And I mostly, at least for my role in the context of BMPD, is situated within the capstone projects and the fourth year and the upper years, the third years. trying to create a link between storytelling and politics and the cultural social context, which is what I do in my own personal research. So it kind of all came together in a very interesting, fun way. So I could be an artist here, also professionally, and intersect research, and it's been really fun.
So awesome. And Professor Graham, how about you?
Yes, so I'm Katie Graham. I joined BMPD in 2019 as an instructor, and my background is also different than everyone else's, which is the great thing about this program. So I did my previous schooling as an architect. So my intention was to become an architect. But then I had a great opportunity starting in my undergrad, actually, as a research assistant at Carleton Immersive Media Studio, which is a lab at Carleton associated with the School of Architecture, where I got to start to use different digital technologies to try to represent architecture or tell the stories of architecture. And what it did was it gave me this desire and this love for taking technology and figuring out how to force it to do something it's not meant to do. And that really kind of sparked this desire to try to use technology for storytelling. And so while at Sims, I started a focus on digitally assisted storytelling. So using different digital technologies to tell the story of spaces and places. And from that, that's kind of where I got connected to the BMPD program. When I saw that this program existed, I was just like, that's exactly what I've been doing, except it expands, that it no longer just looks at space and place. It looks at any type of story, any type of point of view. And so I thought, yes, this is where I want to be. And that is how I joined BMPD. So
I think the mix of different backgrounds is so awesome. And I think that makes for such an interesting experience for students too, to be able to learn from so many different kinds of people with different backgrounds. I'm curious to know for each of you why you guys believe that the digital storytelling skill set is so important and why you chose to commit this part of your career to this program, because it definitely means a lot for the students, but I'm really interested to know more about why. Professor McArthur, can I hand this one to you first?
Sure. So I think what it largely comes down to is even what I was seeing in my earlier days as a web developer, is I would meet with many clients, who themselves weren't experts in the technologies. They were giving me like their stories and their information, and sort of trusting my expertise to be able to present it in a way that aligned with their goals, but also still, was easy to use and everything else. And the more and more I started working with the websites, as they got more complex, they were adding new types of technology to each website to make them more engaging, more interactive. I found there was a big disconnect between how sort of story information would be given to me and then how it had to be sort of translated to work properly. Like each format sort of has its own different storytelling affordances. You don't tell stories the same way on a web page as you would in VR or an interactive game or a Twitter campaign and things like that. So this digital literacy, not just understanding, what web pages are, how to code them, how to shoot video, how to edit digital video. But if you had to tell the same story across different platforms or translate someone's story into a platform that they're most interested in, it's not just a matter of technical know-how, but understanding how to effectively tell a story in that platform versus another one is really crucial.
And Stéfy, how about you? Why did you choose to participate in this opportunity, and what's the importance of digital storytelling to you?
Storytelling, at least from my perspective, is very, very powerful. It could be dangerous if it's done wrongly, and it's also really, really important to share cultural, political, and social events, as I've already said multiple times, which you'll hear me say constantly. But one of the things that always comes to mind when it comes to storytelling is the roles that storytelling has played in colonialism and also in the ways in which communities also combat colonialism and anti-racism and queerphobia and such. Storytelling is one of those things that, as we know with colonialism, sorry, those are my dogs, that if some stories are not told, then we live in a culture where things are inaccurate and there's a lot of voices that become silenced. Why I find digital storytelling so compelling and interesting is that it allows for a circulation of stories and distribution of stories outside of small knit in-person communities. We've seen that specifically through the pandemic. We've also seen that through online activist projects like hashtags on Twitter, where we've seen the Idle No More movement work, Black Lives Matter. So it allows a global perspective and a global geopolitical ways of which we can engage with these stories that are often silenced by marginalized people, specifically in the North American Canadian or so-called Canadian context. So for me, I think digital storytelling allows for the opportunity for accessibility of these stories and giving communities who are often silenced the opportunity to share their stories in the ways in which benefit them, but also are accurate. And that's either through oral traditions or artwork or anything you can think about. But there is definitely a power to stories and a lot of silencing of stories that has been historically really detrimental and still actually happens today.
And Professor Graham, how about you?
I think the way that I want to kind of expand on what everyone else has already said is really that the idea of the multiple stories, because we have here is like two great examples of why digital storytelling is so important. And what really we can see is that like digital storytelling is allowing everyone to have a platform to be able to tell their story, as well as to provide multiple different points of views and different ways of seeing a story. And what I think is really important is when digital storytelling is used not to just tell a new story, but to tell the same story over and over again from these different perspectives and using different technologies. And it's from that repeatedness that we get kind of more of an understanding of what's going on, that we can say that tell the same story about like the day, a day of going to school. And it can be from multiple perspectives, focusing on multiple different parts of the day and using different technologies to expand on it. So that idea that Professor McArthur mentioned of like transmedia storytelling and Professor McKnight talking about the different points of views to help with that. It's just great to have that ability to expand on all of that concepts, points of views, and different types of media using digital storytelling. So that's what I love about it, just the multiple points of views and ways to tell a story over and over again and making it fresh and helping people understand through that repeatedness.
Professor McArthur, I'm going to throw the next question to you first again, but I guess this is more a question related to the high level kind of steering of the program. And when it comes to planning the courses, is there a specific kind of future or notion of the future that you're trying to prepare students for in constructing the curriculum for this program? And how do digital storytelling skills fit into that notion of the future?
I think kind of building upon some of the themes that have been coming out in a lot of the discussion today is the idea of building upon maybe like an existing digital literacy that students are bringing into the, because many of them are already quite tech savvy and frequent social media users and things like that. So building upon that knowledge, teaching them tools that will help them get the kinds of skills that they'd like to get, but also preparing them for sort of like an unstable footing. When people think, from high school going into like a digital media type program, they think, okay, I want to go in and I want to learn like the high-end toolkits that I'll likely be using in my job. And then I'll feel like, I'm a professional practitioner in this field. And then from personal experience watching, say, the current Adobe Creative Cloud and all of its iterations over the last couple of decades, toolkits change, industry standards change, new technologies emerge, they come and go. VR has had a few moments of popularity over the last few decades with each sort of new technology. And so I think being able to give them enough skills that they feel confident to tell stories across multiple platforms to prepare them for the different types of scenarios they may find themselves in. But the, I guess, the understanding that these things will always be shifting and changing. And so having a high level knowledge of storytelling affordances will help them adapt to a very fast paced changing environment.
I think that's so true about the uncertainty of the future and how quickly technologies come and go. Even just since high school, like having a basic understanding of what the digital media landscape might look like, but then stepping into university, you're exposed to a whole new world of possibilities. And it also kind of, in my experience, has made you realize how quickly that's going to change as you progress in your career. But I think having that having that base level toolkit, prepares you very well. Stéfy, what are your thoughts about the future and the role that digital storytelling is going to play in it all? And any frameworks or specific skill sets you want to prepare students with for that future?
Drawing off of what Vicki just said in terms of technology constantly changing, while technology develops with time and culture and everything, what stays, what I hope that'll stay as much static as our ability to work with communities and people in ways that are inclusive, that are, really built on care and reciprocity, and that we think about decolonization, and when we think about how we can engage with people in a way that is helpful for everyone, right? That we're all on an equal playing field, or whatever that's supposed to look like. And I think although technology advances, we can always use that to respond to these questions and these events. But also what I guess for me, what I really want students to come out of this is that technology is always changing. We can only teach you so much, but ideally what I would like you to come out of here is being a better person, a person who is more aware of the world, about the politics of the world, who understands what our voices can do and what silencing does, and how that plays into policies and to law. And this is a lot of what I talk about in civic engagement, but what does it mean to be a so-called Canadian in this context in North America? What does it mean to be somebody in the world? And how can we address who we are as individuals and also as a collective through this media? So I do think that for me, at the basis is that I like to tell students that I like students to work from their identity and their community and their culture and their politics, and using these technologies as an extension of that, almost like they're cyborgs, that this is just an extra way for them to institute that into their being. And then I think that that's really as much as we can do, because there's only, like Vicki said, there's only so much we can do with this, the history of tech. For me, it's really much that how we use that technology to tell our stories and to be better people within this in these spaces which we occupy.
I love the cyborg analogy. It very much does feel like digital storytelling can allow technology to become an actual extension of ourselves and who we feel that we deeply are.
I wish I made that up, but that is a lot of Donna Haraway. So,
Professor Graham, how about you in terms of the future of storytelling and the role that it plays?
Yeah, I think like one of the foundations of what we need to do within the program is have students be able to look at what technology is there and try to think about what they can use it for, and how different technologies have different ways of telling stories and communicating. Because as was said earlier, the technology changes. It changes so quickly that something that is from like a year ago is now all of a sudden out of date. So to teach that skill set, it won't work, because that won't be there later. And what we need to do is we need to be able to look at the technology that's available, no matter what it is, and think about how can we use that. And that's the main thing, is that in the program in general, we introduce so many different tools and technologies and examples, and all of it isn't to say this is the only way, but it's just like, what is different about each one, and why did it use that technology to tell that story, and how did that work? So then later on we can pick up, whatever the next thing is, be it like holograms, and we go, how do we use this for our benefit? Or and how can we use the newest version of virtual reality or the newest version of Adobe Photoshop to tell our stories? And so that's the main thing, is the program and digital technologies. And when we look at it in general, we don't want to just only look at what's available now, but understand how we can examine the tools and how it tells a story.
Professor Graham, I'm going to go back to you. I'm curious to know what the biggest challenge has been in running this program, especially in its early days so far.
I think the biggest challenge is the pandemic. So the pandemic has definitely threw us for a loop, in the sense that the main thing about how I planned on teaching courses, and I'm pretty sure it'll be said again, but like with hands-on things, showing of the technology and all of this. But at the same point, the most interesting things came out of having to force ourselves to be able to figure out how to teach online and remotely and without touching shared equipment. So although it was really challenging, by having to use my class and as an example of digital media and digital storytelling, it became a great opportunity, and I think my courses are better for it. So biggest challenge is also the biggest benefit, maybe not benefit, but it had a big reward as well in some high quality examples and some new ways of looking at technology and showing that we can still do things even if we can't be in person.
Maybe I'm biased, but I can say from my perspective, at least, that the BMPD courses were definitely the most engaging virtually, at least. And I think that speaks to the skill set that's being taught in the course. So once again, maybe I'm biased, but I do think it's true. Stéfy, what about you? What has the biggest challenge been in teaching so far?
I would say the same as Katie. The pandemic, I think personally, has really affected me in a little bit of a different way, mainly because I was hired the day that Carleton officially declared it had a pandemic and it was shutting down. So I signed my contract that day and I started my hiring on July 1st, which was, within the pandemic. So I have never, since being in the BMPD, have taught in person. Or have met students in the same way. So it's been 2 years of me getting to know the program from a different town and getting to know students in a way that normally I like being very animated in class. I like doing activities. So it's been a little bit harder to do remotely. I mean, very hard. And also a lot of my classes start very theory heavy. So they're probably not as fun as like the techie fun stuff. That being said, I have been trying to manipulate the online world. I've been live streaming Legends of Arceus with my students and some Pokemon games and stuff. But that's been my personal challenge, which does, thread in with the MPD and our challenge of working remotely. But I agree with what Katie has said. It's allowed us to be very creative in our outputs in a way that I think that other faculty and other departments may have struggled with. I think that it's really telling, at least for what I see my colleagues, is that they are in these positions for a reason, because if they could put this stuff online and look as flawlessly as they do, then it's like they're experts in media production, right? Like I am a little bit on a different end, a different spectrum of that, but I do see it from both Katie and Vicki. It's been really cool and incredible. That being said, I'd love to be back in person, or be in person for my first time. I think it's better.
And Professor McArthur, how about you? What's the biggest challenge been since the beginning?
So I was lucky to come in a little bit earlier in 2018. And what's really challenging there, aside from kind of spending a year without any awesome colleagues to sort of lean on, is when you think about it, like programs when they first launch have been years in creation, identifying courses, creating new course titles that'll go in the calendar, years before the first person who's going to teach them often is even hired. And so what happens is you're coming in and you're sort of given this roadmap, and without knowing necessarily if you were the exact or if you would interpret the courses the exact same way as the person who wrote these calendar descriptions, you think, okay, I'm tasked with setting the stage for 4 years of someone's professional development, like no pressure. And so you try to think, if I have to introduce a concept, where do I start? How far back do I have to go? How much ground do I have to cover? And then to provide someone with sufficient theoretical background to jump into a hands-on workshop, 3 months later. And so I think that there's a lot of pressure to kind of setting the stage there, knowing that oftentimes when you teach a brand new course, you'll usually make slight changes to it every year. And so now that I've been doing it for a while, I really like the pacing I have in my courses and everything. But the first time, like winging it is an understatement in terms of like you make these plans and you hope they're sufficient without knowing what your students are going to be like, what kinds of new things are going to happen during your course that are worth bringing in, and what types of methods are going to work best for today's learners in a given context. So I think all those sort of unknowns at first were really difficult, but I think we've got a really great team and a really great pace and a really great rhythm now. So I'm really happy with where we've come, but at first it's very nerve-wracking at the very beginning.
What was it like from your perspective that first year, that first cohort of students to run through the program? Because they were kind of like the guinea pigs, and that must have felt like such a learning experience for you. Like, what were the reflections after year one?
What was kind of neat was that I was a guinea pig for a similar program a few years prior at the undergraduate level. It was a new program that was created, very interdisciplinary, courses shared across multiple departments. And so I actually brought that knowledge of having been the guinea pig in a brand new program to how I approached things like the design of the courses, as well as kind of advising how we proceed, how we make changes, because we have made a few changes to the calendar overall. I like to think it went well. I hope everyone feels that way. But I think we all learned quite a bit from each other in those early years, just kind of figuring out how best to support very interdisciplinary learners. We're kind of straddling these two very distinct schools within the Carleton University.
And were there any favorite moments or memorable moments that stand out in that journey so far?
Oh, I love when I'm teaching in person and we do augmented reality in the winter hands-on workshop course. And I just love when people first get their first prototype working and they try it out on their phone and they see this like thing loading in the classroom. And I hear people saying, oh my God, I made that, it's working. And I kind of miss overhearing those moments. It's not the same, when you're teaching online, but that's my absolute favorite thing. That and being able to work with these two amazing people, because they really helped to shape and make sure this program is very true to its roots and very interdisciplinary.
Steph, how about you? Any favorite moments so far in being part of BMPD?
So one of my favorite moments was actually one that happened in private amongst the three of us. And the reason why I'm going to bring this up is because it really demonstrates the amount of talent in the BMPD. One of the things that happens often is probably notice this, that the three of us do a lot of research and we tend to get funding to hire students. Well, there was this one time where Katie and I were fighting over who we could hire in terms of students, and we do this quite often. And that's because of how brilliant our students are, which is something that I don't know if I've ever heard that from elsewhere, like that we actually get together constantly and are like, okay, you can have this student, I guess, I'll take this. Like, not that, like, we always want everybody else's students and we want everybody and we're always hiring everybody because everyone's so great that sometimes it's really hard to take the funding we have and try to give it to everybody because there are just so many good ones. And I find that such a testament to the students here and their knowledge, but also, to the skills that they're developing in this program and just how brilliant all of you are. Like, I feel like it's so hard to hire students because I can't decide who I want. And I know that that's something that the three of us talk about all the time in the background. So for me, that's really, really exciting. It's also a little bit tricky, but it just demonstrates how brilliant it is. And I feel very fortunate to work with all of you because I feel like I would hire all of you for anything that I do. And I don't have enough money to hire everybody, but I want to.
And Professor Graham, how about you? A favorite moment that comes to mind?
It's kind of hard, but I guess just to kind of continue off of that, one thing that I do love is being able to provide opportunities for students so many times. And we found many ways to do it through like the BMPD Storyteller project for one, as well as other small projects here and there. And it's always great to have the student influence in our work. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I like is when I've been able to hire a student to help develop something for the course, like a course, for example, like through the different platforms that Carleton has. And then what's great is that I'll get them to do something that benefits the course, but also uses their skills from digital media and like all of the storytelling capabilities, and they get to choose what they do and apply it. But to kind of add to that as another favorite moment, I feel it was that moment where I felt like I had made it as a teacher or a professor. It was in first year, my first year teaching in the first semester, and I taught the second year cohort. So it was the first cohort, but in their second year. And I made a comment in like one of the first classes about, I don't really care if you eat or drink in the class, like bring a whole chicken for all I care, but you have to share it if you do. And then one day I came in and there was a whole chicken bag and all the sides like on the desk. And it like, and we shared it all at lunch. It was great. It was just like, what is this? Why is there a chicken on my desk? And it made that feeling that there was a community. It wasn't just a classroom where I was the professor and they were listening and were afraid to make a joke or a comment, but it was a community, and we could laugh and create things together. So that's, I think, maybe one of my most favorite moments.
That's awesome. Even from a student perspective, it does very much feel like a community. Even when we went virtual, I remember in second year in your class, Professor Graham having like the morning jam board where students could go up and draw on the whiteboard, the virtual whiteboard. And it was always fun to see who would come up with something fun first thing in the morning, even though we were all quite tired. But yeah, there is something special about the BMPD community for sure. I'm curious to know if you guys were undergraduate students today, maybe in BMPD or maybe not, what would you do differently knowing what you know now as professors? Stéfy, can I start with you first?
Oh, I have an answer to this one. It's funny because I talk to my partner about this all the time because I watch a lot of things on social media. I watch a lot of these YouTube channels, Harold, of people like who play Magic or talk about D&D, and I'm always like, if I was an undergrad and I wish I knew more of the jobs out there that we don't talk about. Like, I would love to be a D&D game designer or like work with Magic and work on like drawing those things. No one told me that was a possibility when I was an undergrad, but also we didn't have social media in the same way where, you know, influencers were online getting paid to make these videos. So for me, those are things that I wish I knew. And I try to tell my students that all the time. Like when I'm live streaming like a Pokemon game, one of the coolest things that happen is sometimes I have a student come on and like they play with me, like they'll play their game beside and then I'll play mine, and then we'll just like talk about, you know, gaming. And I'm always like, do you know this is a job that you could do? Like that this is a job I wish I knew I could do. And now, I mean, I love where I've ended up and I love this job to death, but those are some of the things that I wish I knew, is like be more creative in what you can do afterwards. You're not stuck to these jobs that you always hear about, like web developers and stuff, but there are jobs in the world you can't even conceptualize. There's things that you can get paid to do that are so rooted into your hobbies and the stuff that you love to do. It's just, you know, a little bit of Googling, or every time you see something, you know somebody's made that thing. So just being a little bit more aware of those opportunities. Again, every time I watch something on Magic and I'm like watching one of those pre-release party things, I'm like, someone has this job. Someone just creates the lore and tells those stories. Why don't I do that? Anyways, I digress. But that is something that I wish I knew in my undergrad that I tell my students now.
Professor McArthur, how about you? What if you were an undergrad today? What do you think you'd do differently?
I think along the same lines, there's a lot about university that I didn't really know about as an undergrad, and I've actually learned about through helping students over the years find services on campus, or sort of overhearing stories about clubs and things like that. I didn't really start getting involved in clubs until sort of the end of my time at university. And so there's a lot of really interesting groups that you can find on campus that have different interest sets. Some things that seem very niche back home in high school all of a sudden have like their own club at the university that you can join. So things like that, as well as just services. A lot of people, when they come, find out about things like PMC, but they don't know there are a whole lot of different services designed to help students in a whole bunch of different areas. So I think even just starting to become familiar with those things, asking academic advisors for different types of tips and how to sort of navigate the school as a system. Because you can do a lot more at university, and the university can do so much more for you than just give you courses and rooms and teachers and say, go at it.
Yeah. And Professor Graham, what about you?
I think the one thing that is really important that I myself and many other undergrads don't realize at the time is that, like, you are there to learn, and we always expect when we're in those moments that we have to do the best and we're not allowed to make mistakes. And this goes for school as well as like co-op opportunities and work opportunities, like for part-time work within the school. It's a learning opportunity and you're expected to make mistakes. And And that's okay. It's part of the learning process, and you should take risks, because the bigger the risk, sure, you might make a mistake and you might, like the outcome might not be what you want, but you also have this chance of really discovering something new about your own skills and your own interests. And that's really what I wish that I had known when I was an undergrad. And it was once I started taking those risks and going, you know what, I don't want to do what's expected of me. I want to do something really crazy and do something like not orthodox here. That's when I really started enjoying school more and enjoying research and developing stuff.
That's awesome. The last question that I like to end these podcasts with is if there's any food for thought that you guys want to leave the student listeners with, whether it's just something to sit with and reflect on, or if there's any technology that you guys are keeping a close eye on, or things that you're optimistic about for the future. But any food for thought to leave the student listeners with in the BMPD program. Professor Graham, can I throw it back to you first, and then we'll go around?
Ooh, I don't know if I have a good answer right away. I guess it's just don't be afraid to try something new. And if there's something that you want to do for an assignment or a project that might not be fitting within the exact criteria, it doesn't mean that you can't like talk to the professor and figure out how you can make it work. So use school as a way for you to learn and develop your skills, and talk to your professors to better do that.
Okay, I think that's really good advice. Stéfy, what about you? Food for thought for students?
One of the things I tell my students at the end of like every lecture and every email is to prioritize self-care. University and being a student is one aspect of our really busy lives, and there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that makes a complete human. So I think for everybody, whether you're faculty, whether you're a student, is to prioritize rest and self-care. And I don't mean like go out and do yoga, because self-care looks like very different for other people. But if it means, you know, taking an extra few minutes in the morning with your coffee or your drink, or if it means taking more breaks in between writing, or hanging out with a friend, or having a chat with somebody, just make time to do that. I notice a lot of students who come to me at the very end asking for extensions and say, you know, I have all this stuff and I feel overwhelmed. And for me, I always say, yes, you have that extension, but that extension requires self-care, that extension is not just giving you more time to do your work, but that you actually take an afternoon off or something, because this is only one aspect of your life. It sounds really, really, really big, and it feels big, and it is, but you will never truly 100% succeed in all ways in terms of like health and capacity if you don't prioritize yourself, and your rest is really, really important. So that's my biggest thing that I would say to anybody.
That's so important. And Professor McArthur, what about you? Food for thought for students?
I think hopefully people who are already been with us for a while kind of get that we like to be like a tight-knit community, and we like to you know, help our students grow as much as we can. But I think like one of the biggest misconceptions, you know, in high school leading up to university, you know, I remember like my English teacher saying to us, you know, your professors will never know your names, and you know, they don't care about you and whatever. So they take advantage now where, you know, you're a name and not a number and blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, some of my university classes were big, but most of them, the professors learned our names. The professors knew our progress. The professors knew when we needed help. Sometimes you have to ask for help, but I think just not being afraid of professors. Like we're people too. We're not just here looking to fail people. Like we're here trying to grow people, trying to grow future practitioners. So I guess just not to be afraid to ask us questions, not to be afraid to ask for guidance, clarification, things like that. You know, we try our best to be approachable. Online makes that kind of difficult, obviously, but just not to be afraid to reach out and ask for help.
I think that's fantastic advice from everybody. I just want to say thanks so much for taking the time to chat. It's been an absolute blast to speak with all of you guys, so thank you.
Thanks so much, Max.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to the 8th and final episode of our Connected Future. I just want to say it's been an absolute blast to have worked on this project alongside such incredible members of the BMPD community. I'd also like to express my gratitude to the interview guests for their willingness to speak with me and for sharing their own stories and insights with our audience. I do hope that these conversations will act as a starting point for a continued generational conversation about the future of technology and how we want to shape it. I believe that technology has the capacity to do incredible good for the world, but also the opposite if it's not developed intentionally and carefully. The answers to the questions I will have to ask in these decades ahead won't be simple, but if we can each practice open-mindedness, critical thinking, and civic dialogue, I think we'll all be much better prepared to embrace digital transformation. With that said, this is your host, Max Peacock, signing off for now, and you'll hear from me again soon. Cheers.